Our subject is the four elements, the imbalance of which lead to the control dramas, which are the intimidator, the victim, the poor me, the interrogator, and the aloof. If you need those control dramas introduced, just go to the previous video where we introduce them and their connection to the writer James Redfield. But I'm going beneath this now and attempting to put a theoretical undergirding into this control drama hypothesis. The four cognitive elements, that is to say that they are to do with human cognition. Now, when I say human cognition, I mean every time we perceive something in the world, there's a relationship between subject and object. And we don't merely perceive, we are disposed towards the object in some way. For example, I might desire a new car. Well, the object is the Maserati or whatever, or the little Datsun or Toyota Corolla Ascent. Or in my case, a people mover. Now, that's the object, but my disposition towards it is desire. Desire has a certain quality as an energy. It's a seeking quality, it's a wanting quality, a wanting to have. It has a pursuit about it. It comes from here, from self, and it goes towards its object, its target, the object of desire. Do you see what I mean? So that perception of desiring the car, the object is kind of enveloped and wrapped in this element, this cognitive element. And it is the fire element, which I've translated into psychological jargon as desire. Now, think about the element in nature. Fire is luminous and radiant and bright. And it rises up, doesn't it? You light a fire and the flames lick up and then they rise up to the sky. Similarly, this element, when it manifests in human psychology and emotion, gives us a brightness, an energy, and a warmth. We say, oh, they're a warm person, they're energetic, they're vivacious, they're lively. And that liveliness can enliven other people. That warmth can cause other people to thaw and heat up. But if it's present in excess, it can scorch, it can burn. Each element can do its own damage. Too much fire can be hostility, violence, aggression, abuse. Because the same fire that leads to appropriate self-assertion, if in excess, comes across as aggression. So where is the line between assertiveness and aggression? Then there's the water element, which I've equated with feeling. So I might feel grief for the loss of a relative, let's say, somebody who died. The object in the world is a state of affairs, a dead body. But I have a feeling around it. I'm not just neutral. My perception envelops this object in the feeling of grief or whatever. Or it might just be that somebody I'm fond of has gone away on holiday and I miss them. So there's a feeling. The water element doesn't jump out of itself like the fire element. The water element is passive. It flows downhill, doesn't it? If you release water, it will flow to the lowest place. Whereas fire jumps up, water flows down. And it has this malleable quality that it can just conform itself to any channel and to any vessel that it fills. Think of vessels of different shapes, cups of different shapes and sizes. You pour water in, it conforms itself to the shape of the vessel. So it flows down and it fills, and it reflects, and a whole host of things. So when you're feeling, it's like you are receiving the impress of your circumstances. Desire comes from self and moves out to the world, but feeling comes from our impressionability and receptivity. Something's happened out there, somebody's gone away, a relative's died, there's been another development, and you didn't make that happen, but in response to that happening, you feel something. You with me? Now, if this element is present in excess, in surfeit, well, it can be quite debilitating in its own way, because you can feel like a victim of circumstances, a plaything of circumstances, like you have no agency, no power to change anything, that life is just pummeling you and you're receiving all these blows, and it is generating all these feelings inside of you, and all you're doing is feeling, responding, reacting. So that's that element. We need feeling. Absolutely. It's one of the highlights of being human, to be able to have feelings for people and for circumstances.
It's part of being human.
That's right. But consider what also happens when it gets out of control, out of balance. Now, then we come to the air element. Now, what do we notice about the element of air in nature? We notice that it is usually clear and light and expansive and fills great spaces. And if you go up into the air element in a plane or something and look down, you have a bird's eye view of everything. Or you can say that mountain range is to the west and that river is to the left or to the east, and there are fields and plains. You see the big picture. Now, in the human makeup, the air element is intellect. Intellect is what provides reasons and explanations for things. Everybody needs this ingredient because we all try to give explanations for why things happen in life. And whether you're a believer or an unbeliever, you have your own explanation. We are intellectual beings. We don't merely see things as isolated sense data. We connect the dots, don't we? We connect the dots between cause and effect. What does that? Intellect, the air element. And when it's functioning, it's a wonder to behold in the great intellectuals and so on. They can spin their webs, and I don't mean that pejoratively, I mean that they can adumbrate their systems in all the detail of explanation and reason. And it contributes to human life because we need to have a model of how things work, an explanation for how things work, so that we can engage with the world. We have the bird's eye view from the intellect. Just like a bird flying through the air. Now, when does the intellect not do its job properly? When do the explanations not explain something? When do the reasons not work? Are there times when there are too much words, far too many words, and not enough content, meaning, appropriateness, effectiveness? I think we've all had the experience of producing such a storm ourselves, or being on the receiving end of such a storm. And the more that's said, the less there's understood. And sometimes less is better. And sometimes we're just trying to connect with one another, and then there's just this storm, hurricane, tornado,
misunderstanding
of words in between us. There's misunderstanding, and sometimes the answer is not to ask them to explain more.
No.
And sometimes when you query something, it leads to more obfuscation. It leads to less understanding instead of more understanding. If you reflect on what I'm saying, you realize that, there's quite a variability in the effectiveness of words in from one situation to another. And when we use them with one individual or with another. So that element can get out of control. And it can with people that manifest too much interrogation, too many questions, too many explanations, and they try to tell you the whole life story, the classic buttonholer, or maybe the classic preacher, preacher in scare quotes, who has to tell you how to live, what to do, and can't just have a conversation with you. It is a strategy for plundering energy, because when they're on the stage giving their speech, you have to listen. And as long as you're listening, there's a transfer of energy. And these words are the means by which that energy can be extracted. Now we move on to the earth element, which is represented in the physical makeup as physicality. We have a physical body, and with it we can touch and we can sense, and we are grounded through our physical body to the earth. And the earth element is sensuousness, but it's also practicality. It's also physical presence. And if somebody withdraws the earth element, there's physical absence. And that's the basis of the aloof energy plunder strategy. You think of the earth element in nature, it has weight and dignity. Think of rocks and soil and clods of earth. Not light or airy, doesn't rise like fire, it sinks, it drops. There's gravity to the earth element, there's tangibility. and texture, materiality. And so we need the earth element to ground us so that we feel that we're here. We're not just floating off like in the ethers, that we know where we are, that we are physically located, that we enjoy being in our bodies, and that we feel connected in the present moment to what's happening around us. We are connected through the physical body because the physical body is telling us what's happening in real time, in present moment time, through our senses. So as I say, we bring the earth element in or we remove it. And the basis of the aloof energy plunder strategy is removing that element and expecting somebody else to fill that void.
That's not good.
Well, none of them are good, but are they at least intelligible?
Well, if you're desperate.
Do they make sense, like how they might come about and how they relate to the elements?
You see it happening in your own life.
Yes.
All the time. Yeah.
And just as a brief aside, psychologists like Carl Jung and esotericists have tried to explain the psychological functioning, cognitive functioning, by numbers as well. Like the content of consciousness, which consists of all those objects of sense perception enveloped with the elements, is symbolized by the number 4. I think in Jungian psychology you'll find that, because these 4 elements envelop all the content of consciousness and present that content. But then the context of consciousness, or consciousness itself, is presented by, it's symbolized by the number 3. I've said somewhere else that intuition contextualizes the content of consciousness. So on the one hand you have perception, which is mediated by the physical body. It's a way of apprehending the world through the portals of the senses. It takes a physical body to perceive. Whereas intuition is more a direct insight, intuition, it looking into what? The physical? Actually, no. The non-physical, the psychospiritual. And the triplicity, which has to do with the context of consciousness, or the subjective side of consciousness. There's the objective side of consciousness to do with the content of consciousness, symbolized by the number 4, and the subjective side, symbolized by the number 3, which is this triangulation of the knower, the known, and the knowledge. Now, that might sound a bit bamboozling, but there's a knower inside. That's you, I, the subject, I. Right? Now, the known is not out there in the external world. It's an appreciation that other consciousnesses have their own observations that are going on. You're not knowing something via the physical body, and you're not knowing something essentially different from yourself. You're knowing something that's similar to yourself, because the other is similar to yourself. And knowledge is the relationship between the two. And that embraces both the singular frame of reference that I have and the manifold frames of reference I find, in other observers, because they all have views and takes on life. That's a little shorthand for understanding that triplicity, that triangulation, that describes the subjective side of cognition, just as we have the four elements, the four cognitive elements entailed in the objective side of cognition, that is to do with objects in the external world. The four elements and the content of consciousness that the four elements envelop and bring in, if you like. Does that make sense, or is that a bit confusing?
No, it makes sense to me.
Okay, well then I'm glad that I made that little aside. But getting back to our main line of inquiry, which was what? It was to do with, now, these elements can correct one another. First of all, there's a kind of, and again, you can find this thought of thinking and an elaboration of this in Jungian psychology. Carl Jung did a lot of work on the psychological elements and how they balance each other. But I'm going to give you my take. Fire and water complement each other. Oh, air and earth tend to complement each other. I think in Jungian psychology, when one of these was called the superior function, the complement or opposite was the inferior function, was unconscious. And it involved a struggle and a work to try and bring that element to consciousness, to bring a balance. Now, think of it this way. If there's a fire, you have to put it out with water. So water can temper fire. What tempers water? Air. And what tempers air? Earth. And what tempers earth? Fire. And you go around the circuit. Water tempers fire, which is in turn tempered by air. And the earth tempers the air, and the fire tempers the earth, and the water tempers the fire. And they form a circle. Each element tempers another, and is in turn tempered by another. If there's too much anger, sometimes water can be the corrective. And good counsellors know this in
Douse it in water.
spiritual counsel, where you put a fire out with water, but also like, what does it mean? Because if you can bring to light the disowned element, the partner that's gone unconscious, then you can bring a tempering. Like, let's say there's a lot of fire in the personality. This person has a tendency towards anger. They might even be red-faced. Hot head. They might even actually have capillaries that are showing, and they're impulsive. And if you can put them in touch with the water, with their vulnerability, right? When a person actually feels their vulnerability and their fragility and owns it, the fire just settles.
Oh, for sure.
You can't be angry when you can't throw it. If you realise you're in a glass house, you're less likely to throw a stone.
Absolutely.
The people that are throwing the stones don't realise that they're in glass houses and they can be thrown out at any moment.
That's right.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So a gifted spiritual counsellor or counsellor could maybe do that. Now, if somebody's wallowing in a surfeit of the water element, they're feeling very depressingly victimized. They're feeling too vulnerable. They're feeling too much of a victim. Giving a philosophical explanation, introducing the air element, that can broaden their perspective about their relationship with their circumstances and with their world. A philosophical perspective on things can lift the poor victim out of their isolated misery and help them realize that there is a bigger plan and there's a bigger plan unfolding. And acquiring a philosophical perspective is often a very good corrective to somebody who languishes in victimhood inappropriately. Look, I'm not saying that there aren't such things as true victims. I'm not emptying the word victim of its meaning, but I'm just using a phrase that we can understand readily. And part of that is because it's been popularised by New Age people like Redfield and so on. Oh, you don't want to be a victim. Sometimes people are victims and sometimes people are martyrs, I will add. And sometimes even they willingly choose that role for a great good. Now, what happens if there's a storm going on in your head and the air element is racing out of control and you're too wordy, too verbose, too many explanations, can't still that mind, you can't stop talking, and you can't not maybe teach or divulge what you know to everybody all the time, because that's who you are. So
they may not be ready for it.
No, they may not be ready for it. They may not be able to hear it. So instead of like getting in touch with some other element and connecting with them via that, you're just stuck there in the air element. Then the earth element can provide a corrective. The corrective for too much intellectuality is to do something that grounds you. Stand on the grass, take a walk, cook a meal, take out the garbage, do something physical. The earth element is very structured too. It's the earth element that provides routines and rituals in our life. So when you're doing the routine, you have to bring a certain amount of attention into the physical, because it's something that is done. You do it, and that helps take you out of your intellect. We often hear, the criticism, it's all head stuff, they're all in their head. That can happen. We can get caught in our heads, and we need to do something that can bring us back down into our bodies. That's the corrective. Routines can be really helpful, especially when they are routines involving a fair bit of physicality or labour or gardening. Gardening's great. Connects you directly with the earth element. You actually got your fingers in the earth, your hands in the earth. So there you have it. We might call that the cycle of the elements, or the cycle of the temperance of the elements. Water tempers fire, air can temper water, earth can temper air, and fire can temper earth. And if we get it wrong, we'll no doubt be witnessing control dramas break out all around us. And when we get it right, the control dramas can be transmuted. They seem to settle, but where has that energy gone? That dynamic is being transmuted into something else. And when human beings can connect to the source of energy and not expect to fill their deficiencies of energy from other people, then they are replenished from the source and they are free to engage in non-toxic relationships with other people. So that the overall energy in that relationship, be it a partnership or be it a group relationship or wider, is elevated. And that's what we're here to do. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.